Okay, thank you for coming back. We've now got a couple of sessions to run through before lunch. Not that I'm rushing anyone. We're going to start looking at new business aviation models, and then we're going to have a session looking at how Malta's rising as a jurisdiction for aircraft finance, which has been touched on. But we're absolutely delighted to have Max. Oh, the slide's wrong. We're delighted to have Max from RISE. Actually, Max, do you want to explain RISE very quickly?
Hi, hello everyone, and it's wonderful to be here. So RISE is a tech company, and we work for operators, some of them who are here. And we supply our tech to those operators who want to have a more efficient fleet. And this can be within the fractional ownership business, where you're looking to slash your empty legs as much as possible. But it's also true within charter, so we cater to both. I'll keep it short.
And how do you identify, how do you optimize an empty leg?
So every operator has a flight management system. So the gents from Flex are here, so that's one of the leading platforms. There are a couple others.
You have to name everyone.
Do I? Okay.
Yeah.
Leon Software, Skylegs, etc. My AirOps, I shouldn't forget, because I'm being watched. There we go. So every operator has, their flights and their fleet and their pilots within the flight management system. Our system integrates with that, so there's a connection, a flow of information between the two. And so at any point of the day, it's now 12, looks like it's a good time to optimize the next few days. And at that point, the users are either within sales or within ops. They will use our system, and just with the click of a button, they can have their schedule rejigged to make sure that it's optimal. And optimal is essentially, you've got an algorithm running in the background and making sure that every aircraft is doing the right flight. So that if you look at the next week or the next couple of weeks, you're really minimizing the costs associated with your schedule. So it saves on flight time, so unnecessary flight time. It saves landings, and of course it saves time to those who use the platform as well, because it's all of the poor teams that are working out flight times and trying to see, so hang on, so if I position the aircraft from Zurich to London to pick up that client, and then so all that is now automated, so they can elevate their minds a little bit.
Okay, and Eric, you don't need an introduction. You've been here in Malta for a long time. You've worked at you're actually everything Charles complains about. You've worked for so many different companies.
I hope it's not so bad, but indeed it's great to be back here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces, some faces, 20 years back. That's really great to see, and to see the momentum here in the industry. We're not a tech company, but we're implementing tech very rapidly, quicker than anybody else. I'm here for HansJet. HansJet exists since like 4 years. We're a highly branded, highly consistent fleet operator, circling around the PC-12, commercially operated. Compared to other PC-12 operators, we keep the highest standards. And we're now at the tracking point, at the section where we definitely have to involve a lot of IT to get the best results out of the business, right? And it took the team a while to understand that there is technology doing that job, and now we're ready to implement. So what we do is basically offer fleet, of very consistent high product aircraft towards audience flying and paying from A to B, similar to the fractional operators, with guaranteed availability and occupied hours.
And how big's the fleet now?
We were at 3 aircraft, 4 aircraft, 6 aircraft, and we now phased in the first PC-24, experimenting with jets and how that works. So by end of the year, probably 10. And
you'll only buy Swiss-made aircraft?
No, not only, but we try hard. Yeah, they're not for sale.
So the title of the session is New Business Aviation Models, and I think so. Let's go through some trends. Eric. 10 years ago, a lot of people were saying fractional and other programs wouldn't work in Europe. Is that argument still going on?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's a very short, clear answer, no. I mean, fractional works nowadays, or hybrid models around the idea of fractional, because fractional is actually the burden of what the customer is getting. It's a wrong terminology, because as a passenger, you would like to have guaranteed availability and occupied hours only, very transparent pricing, and a consistent quality. Now, that's difficult to summarize under one word, and that's where people come up with fractions. But the idea behind got very, very popular in the last 10 years. I saw that development with the silver red stripe operator, and now with us as well. PC-12 acceptance on the charter market, on fractional market, absolutely there. So the world has definitely changed in the last 10 years.
Matt?
Yeah, obviously completely in agreement with that. We work with a couple of fractional operators in Europe. The ones who are in fractional are growing tremendously, and then we're seeing some new operations or parts of operations starting to branch out. I mean, the examples are, just to name a couple, do I have to name everyone again? So, but yeah, Globair just launched a 30 by 30, which is 30 aircraft in fractional by 2030, so that's pretty solid. Within Lux Aviation, there's the CJ4, which is also up for slices, and many more actually, so absolutely, and it's not an upcoming trend, it's there.
And do you think passengers are passengers seeing the advantage in a fleet operator?
Absolutely. I mean, Max has some interesting numbers about percentages in the US versus percentages in Europe.
Yeah, so I mean, currently it's 2/3 of the market in the US of those flying corporate, or those flying private. 2/3 are in fractional. Versus 1/3 renting an aircraft on demand. In Europe, it's the opposite, so fractional is still just 1/3. There are explanations why Americans fly more and why, therefore, the fractional model works better for them. If you're going to fly more than 20, 30, 40 hours a year, it just makes sense. But Europe is lagging. I think Europe is about to catch up.
Absolutely. If you're a business jet user, call it around 50 hours a year, which is, solid use, then you're getting bored with the brown aircraft, and then next time you have the green aircraft, and then you have this, whatever, funky language speaking crew, and then you have this. So at one stage, you want to have a consistent experience, right? You just want to book. You just want to have a solid price, no surprise. You want to have a confirmation within 1 hour and not wait until your preferred broker is coming back, 6, 7 hours later and has a solution, and maybe it's an expensive one, maybe it's a cheap one this time. So if you're in the frequent flyer mode, and that's companies, that's wealthy individuals who all have a travel pattern, right? Of course, they have the bucket list destinations. They want to go to this and that place as a weekend surprise. But generally, frequent flyers, they have a very regular pattern. They have like 5, 6 destinations, factories, companies, holiday homes, a yacht, family members, whatever. And the travel pattern is very stable among these people's plans. So we definitely see that is it 30 hours, is it 60 hours? There is no firm threshold. But in this era, people are changing the behavior, and they would like to have a consistent experience. That's what counts.
And they're less bothered about getting the best deal.
We have a lot of brokers here, and I don't want to annoy them. Brokers are important for us, and they will remain important for us, and are part of the strategy. So that's important, and we will speak about best prices in probably the end of that. But an experienced traveler, he is understanding that, call it a Zurich to Split, will cost him at one stage 16,000, the next time it's 14,000, next time it's 18,000. So at one stage, he or his PA is doing the stats, and they understand that there is a certain pricing behind, and it's then indeed not about the cheapest deal always. It's about really the quality and the consistency behind.
Why do Americans fly more? Good question. Probably because geographically they're more spread out, I assume. Probably it's a bit cheaper, but that's a very good question. There is I mean, we're seeing also something that a few years ago just looked like a small underlying trend, but I think it's effective now because some of our some of the operators are starting to feel it. There is you know, some people walking away from owning an aircraft and doing a bit more of fractional because it's less, you know, their name is less visible, or even moving all the way to charter because then they're just renting a plane and it's okay. So that whole shaming certainly is there. Yeah.
In the US, it's just if you're in a second-tier city and you might be a big company, then it's getting very difficult to be efficient with your travel. You know, so that's where one trend comes in. Additionally, culturally, they have like a 20-year ahead of the curve bonus, you know, towards Europe. You know, so that's why the market is so mature.
And I guess actually you have a lot of large domestic companies that, again, which are all based, which have second-tier locations. And okay, so trend number one is you're confident that the growth in the fractional or blended models happening. You also think there's a rise in floating fleets?
Without a doubt. So the floating fleet model, we actually released a white paper a couple of weeks ago just to see, you know, what's a really efficient fleet and what's not so efficient fleet. Because this is our business, is to take every fleet type and try and make it more efficient. And there is a structural difference within this industry between a fleet that is homogeneous and operated in a floating way versus one that is, you know, 7 different types with an owner behind that needs to give their approval and essentially slows things down. And we're talking, you know, a structural difference of probably 10 percentage points in terms of profit. It's this industry is unfair and will favor those who have consistent fleet, consistent operations. Absolutely.
And you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's not an easy model because you have like daily, endless more challenges than just going home to your hangar, open the door, put in the aircraft, you know, send the pilots home to their home base. So life is more challenging, but definitely we see, is it 10%? I don't know. We're too young for that, but it's definitely, we make the actual return per sector more viable. So it's important for us to have a floating fleet, absolutely.
One of the topics that keeps coming up is staffing. Is it harder to find pilots who'll go on floating fleets who aren't coming home at the end of the day?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, every pilot loves to go home in the evening after a while, you know, but if you have a floating fleet, you're ending up in a hotel. You need a good procurement manager, buying good hotels at good rates, but it's not difficult, but there is a challenge in convincing pilots, you know, that you're now on the road.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it may be appealing to young pilots because floating fleets, again, are typically more efficient. They fly more, and so those who want to clock in hours, they'll like it. But then what every operator seems to be facing, and particularly those ones who have floating fleets, is that after a few years, once the hours have been booked, then the pilot starts to look at something else. And so this churn is the big the big issue here. We've been asked, as of just a couple of weeks ago for the first time, to see if we could integrate pilot preferences as part of the crew pairings in our system. So it just shows that even this industry, where frankly pilot fatigue and pilot preferences are not as central as they are in scheduled airlines, far from there. The idea is starting to come up because just you need to retain these assets, especially the experienced ones.
I have a FlexJet about, I think 5 years ago. They took the person who ran owner, you know, whose job was to keep the owners happy. They made her in charge of pilots for a few years, and I think they think it was worth doing. And it is about making sure you've got a nice hotel. You're not saving that $10. What is the Max? What is the perfect number? When do you start getting efficiencies?
5, 6 aircraft becomes interesting. I mean, when we thought originally that we had a system that would optimize, you know, fleets of 15, 20, 30, and yes, it does. But one of the best days for me was when we signed up a client that had 5 planes, because what it means is that from 5 planes onwards, there starts being seriously many different ways to do your routings, and so this is where the system will have an impact. So you start to have decent coverage if you're operating in Eastern Europe or Southern Europe. 5, 6 aircraft starts what it means is that if a request from one of your clients shows up in Malta tomorrow morning, there is a higher chance that you're going to have an aircraft nearby if you've got 5 or 6 versus 1 or 2.
That's exactly the case. I mean, on the operation side, you start to feel a difference already with 3 aircraft, starting to get difficult to get your brain around, what's the optimal schedule, for tomorrow. And mathematically, financially, it starts to kick in at around 5 aircraft. We do confirm that.
Can you do it in your head for 3 aircraft? Or with a whiteboard? Yeah.
It still works, yeah.
You can do it in your head for 50 aircraft. There's many examples, but it's just far from the optimum. Yeah.
I couldn't do it in my head. What about, so you start getting serious at 5. When do you get real economies of scale as a charter broker? A charter operator, not broker.
I mean, there's no mathematical evidence behind that, but I would say what we feel is behind 4 aircraft, it now starts to kick in. You have to keep your geographical area relatively small. That's how we distinguish towards other competitors. We have more, I would say, the Southern Med as an area at this stage. We feel it with like 4 or 5 aircraft now, definitely. I mean, we have the better yields than per flight hour than competitors, so it works.
And that geographical region, it's hard to say no to someone if they say, I want to fly from the top of your region to Austria, or...
Well, that's where exactly RISE comes in terms of we're not only optimizing what has been sold, but we're trying to optimize, is a flight to Reykjavik more lucrative for us versus maybe a short flight combining 2 owners. And these decisions, they're difficult to make, for like an ops person, and because you have so many parameters, crew rest, the incremental cost, incremental revenue, fixed cost contribution, etc. And these are a lot of factors. So IT will definitely help in the future to make these decisions in terms of, do I take this flight outside my service area, or do I rather have 2 cheaper flights within my service area? About
10 years ago, there was a trend where we saw a lot of operators saying, we're not going to merge, but we're going to form a club, and I don't remember it being particularly successful.
If it's around that question of coverage, definitely you could imagine that let's bet on 10 years from now then, but it does make sense that if Eric has sold a plane from or a flight from Reykjavik back to Zurich. And he doesn't have an aircraft. He knows it's next week. He has that visibility. He knows he's not going to have an aircraft near Reykjavik, but he does have a partner in the area. That is probably the first step that he can take towards optimizing at industry level. I mean, is this something that you're even...
Absolutely, already happening this month. We talked to UK PC-12 operators because UK is an important market for us, and simply traffic rights on a Friday evening, etc., cabotage. It's important to have a UK partner. That's happening, and the same in Central/Eastern Europe, where we see a huge market for this aircraft as well. Discussions are happening, and the barriers have become lower in collaborating, absolutely.
It was tricky, it still is, because you're saying, okay, I've now secured this flight, but I'm not best positioned. I should strike a deal with my partner so that they operate the flight. But hang on, because now the client's going to be in an airframe that is branded from the second operator. Are they going to try and snatch my client? How do we share the price of the flight between us? So there's a few open questions that revolve around marketing and sales, and then the other is the legal. So I can see it taking a few more years before there is something a bit more organized. But on a case-by-case basis, it's really good to hear that Eric has partnerships, and I assume partnerships means trust, and then progressively you get there.
In America, they have started calling this, I don't know if you've heard this, brokerators as a term. It's genuinely, I didn't invent it. Okay, what else, Eric, what else should you do to have efficient fleet?
Well, at the end of the day, it's yield management, and that's a term which is not yet very popular in the business aviation industry, surprisingly, because it's an industry which is already under pressure. You know, the charter market is subsidized since it exists, since 25 years. You know, owners don't get back what they actually should get back. You know, that's an industry problem. So it's all about the yield management, and yield management, if you take that big word, which is out there with airlines, with Ryanair, with hotel industry, they do it every day, right? I mean, we all experience that. If you go to online booking platforms, we see active yield management, and that should happen in business aviation as well. So at time of selling, a sales agent should know, wow, I'm in a hot area, I can sell that high, and I have a reselling chance because we're selling A to B. He always has to have in his mind, how do I sell from B onwards? You know, so that's an extra level where scheduling comes in. On the other side, if you have members who guaranteed availability, they end up in B, and we have another one to pick up in D. I'm quite desperate. I'm not talking about empty legs as such, but there is an area of flexibility between B and D, which I can sell in the next 3-4 days, and that's where yield management, I hope guys of Avinode here, you know, should come in way more dynamically than it is handled now. I mean, right now, if we have a flight in Avinode, and if we deviate from that price, we're getting punished. You know, we're getting a boo grade in terms of, oh, you discount versus what Avinode calculated. And of course, I understand the perspective behind, but on the other side, we're in a highly demanding and dynamic industry where you need to be able to adapt the prices.
Yeah, when you think about it, the two parties involved should be interested in dynamic pricing. What you've seen, and this is not first-hand information, but it's solid second-hand information, where all of the operators are telling us that just over the last few years, for one flight that the broker is looking for, they've been consulting with more and more operators. You know, sometimes it's 20, 30 operators that have been requested a price. That's a sign that they're looking for the best deal, and especially in the short range segment, we're talking to operators who lose a flight for 200 euros to a competitor. So clearly, the end client is looking for a deal. I would say, especially short range, yeah, long range probably not as much. But then the operator selling the price. Same thing. If you know, again, back to Reykjavik, if you have, you're going to have an aircraft there next week, and you want to bring that aircraft back to Central Europe anyways, you're ready to slice that price in two, and why wouldn't you? And then the conversion rate becomes a lot higher, and the two parties become happy. So certainly, there should be more room for yield management. Eric's all about it. Let's see. It's very timid today. Probably. You know, a vast majority of prices that are quoted today are cost plus, and cost plus 10% to be specific, and so that's too bad.
Absolutely, it's crazy that many competitors, they go cost plus 10%. I mean, how ridiculous is that in a world, you know, today, 2025, and you operate with such a model, and they go like, whoa, we're really in a bad shape as an industry.
So are you enjoying not having owner approval?
It's definitely a benefit because, I mean, we need to make very quick decisions, and instead of an owner, we have mathematical formulas, you know, financials to basically, you know, meet each flight hour or meet each decision. So we do have criteria, you know, which we have to meet before we say yes and no to a flight, you know, instead of an owner.
Yeah, so maybe you cannot take pets on that plane or whatever. But owners are an interesting breed sometimes because they'll ask the operator, okay, you know, I want to spread my overheads over as many hours as possible, you know, sweat the asset, but don't fly it more than 200 or 300 hours a year because I want good residual value. All right, what sense do you make of that? And by the way, I'd like to approve every flight you sell before you go ahead and sell it. So that's going to take another hour or two before you can sell. And also, small caveat, if I suddenly decide I want my plane 2 days from now, it needs to be back at base so I can fly it. So it's, Yes, if this is the moment where where we challenge a little bit how things work here, we see a minority of operators starting to do things differently, and well done, because what they've achieved, some of them, is to have the owners not require an owner agreement, not required to fly on their own plane if they need it, and if there's another plane that's better positioned. And all of this, of course, eases what should be everybody's objective, including the owners, which is to sweat the asset.
Okay, so what's next? What are we going to see before, we've got CGI Malta next year. What are we going to see in the next 12 months? What are we going to see in the next 5 years?
Which is happening in Malta here.
Apparently.
I don't know about next year, but we definitely see that IT becomes affordable. IT power, the mathematical force behind of doing quick calculations is now there. And I think, I let Max answer, but what I expect as a customer then of such software is that we're in a wargaming scenario where we can say, okay, again, do we take this Reykjavik flight for this, or no, we better have 3 cheap trips, but we keep there, So decision-making, planning grounds, that's what I'm expecting. IT supported, where I can do simulations of margins, of yields, of pilot fatigue, of hotel cost, of whatever.
This all makes complete sense, but do you think culturally most business jet operators are going to embrace it as much? You've got... do you think we'll see are we going to see everyone doing it, or are we going to see a few very efficient?
It's the second one. As a classic owner manager, it's very difficult to enter that model because you have too many restrictions. But specializing fleet operations, there are more and more coming up. The same players are getting very robust, and I think that trend will continue.
Certainly, we're far from generalizing. This industry has a tendency, and we're talking charter here, has a tendency to sell a tail, or at least a model, and to be somewhat afraid to go back to the client to say, hey, for your flights tomorrow, would you accept a different aircraft? But those who do it seem to have good reception from the client, because think about it, either the client requested a CJ3, but you've got a CJ4 that's better positioned, and therefore that's a free upgrade. Client's happy. The other way around, they've requested a CJ4, but all you've got is a CJ3. If you want to avoid a long ferry, you can offer a really good deal to the client. We're going to take 2,000 off of your invoice here. What do you think? And again, they can refuse it, no problem. But there's usually been good reception. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed that there is a little bit more of that going on. Having a dialogue with the client instead of taking just the request as word of God.
We have to keep in mind, WingX is for sure here, but we have to keep in mind that still roughly 40% of all the flights happening are empty flights, which is ridiculous, and that's where the margin is. The word empty leg is out there, since many years, and many, providers have tried to sell empty legs, and they never really clicked,
Hundreds, yeah.
right? So this Grand Canyon between, charter flight and empty leg and dividing the world only that, black and white, 1 and 0, doesn't really work in my opinion, because there are these hybrids in between, and if we know we have 2 good flights here and there and we can sell a soft area in between, we're discounting. It's not an empty leg, right? It's an area of opportunity, and this dynamic thinking, which is absolutely there in the hotel business, which is absolutely there in the airline business, has not reached business aviation yet, and that's where software will come in.
One of the problems is that it is a much more complex problem. If you have an airline, it's flying there. If you've got a hotel, you're gonna. In the real world, you've got. I remember every time someone launches a new, like Stella came out or Jet Smarter, whenever you searched, can you fly me to Hong Kong tomorrow, it would always say yes, even though you knew they couldn't get a permit. How do you cope with the real world issues like slots, permits?
So if I take the way that we manage this within our tech, not 100%. And it's, so what I mean by this is that if a system is going to recommend how to schedule your fleet, it will take into consideration 80 to 90% of your constraints. It knows everything about the aircraft specifications, capacity, range, etc. It knows everything about the infrastructure. Are the airports open? Is ATC open? What's the firefighting category, etc. So all of that is known to the system. But to your point, permits can be hit or miss. The availability of parking at an airport can be hit or miss. And so from all of that, we learn every day, and the user or the operator needs to weigh in. At some point, the human needs to come in and say, yeah, that looks really good. However, let's see if we can park in Linate on the 15th of August. And the answer, unsurprisingly, is no. And so then you just look for the next solution. So all this to say that we've been talking about this technology, ours and others, as helping with decision making. And that's what they are, but they're never replacing the human. We want the human to work with the system, and only the two together can work out something proper. We don't, unfortunately, interpret NOTAMs or weather TAFs, or maybe one day.
Exactly, that's where limitations are coming in, and we have to be realistic, although now the needle is shifting, with IT power becoming available. 15 years ago, where we had the first experiences on fleet optimizers on large scale, we had the perfect schedule in front of us. After 30 minutes of calculating and making the computer sweat, we had poof, it was the perfect schedule. But then to turn that into reality in terms of replanning, this tail number goes there and that slot goes changed to this aircraft type, and that doesn't work because the parking slot was only this wingspan and whatever. There we got a bloody nose, absolutely. And this was 15 years ago, and I think nowadays we're in a better shape where all these parameters can be included, not completely, but at least to a larger extent, such factors can be included now in these calculations.
And we've got one really good audience question, so final question from me. When you look at AI, and people look at bringing AI into most industries, it's about efficiency, and it's about cutting costs. Business aviation charter costs have not risen in line with inflation. The rate you pay now is the same you were paying 15 years ago. There was a brief blip during COVID, but is this going to and it's great to sell an empty leg, but do you think this is going to make business jet operators more profitable?
So AI, in terms of saving time and generating efficiencies, we're starting to see it in terms of the ground ops and the ground teams, saving time to do everything they have to do and dispatching flights, etc. And how they interact with the systems will become a lot more lean and easy. AI having an impact on the ops themselves. I mean, you said it yourself, Al. We are in a complex industry where no two flights are the same. So having a machine learning algorithm, learn from that, and then try to make something better next week or next year is a little bit more tricky than it might be elsewhere. I think technology in general can help with the empty leg and inefficiencies, absolutely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But I'm not sure about the AI revolution in that particular field.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a revolution. I see optimization points where little bots, in little areas and little fragments are coming in. Again, let's take a flight A to B. A customer, you want to fly home, you had a good show, and you want to take a business jet home, you have A to B. Then you give that to two brokers, and then these two brokers go to Avinode, and then 10 operators are responding, but these 10 operators, they're all going back onto Avinode just to check what is my competitor actually offering. And that's huge inefficiency. And I think there we will see little software fragments or little process fragments, call it, in the whole value chain, where AI will play a role. Other than that, I think it's simply computer power being available nowadays, and I wouldn't really call it AI as such. So I don't call it a revolution, but a permanent evolution with tools being optimized here and there. That's definitely what I'm seeing. But it's not like one big switch and then your whole ops department is gone or your whole sales department is gone and replaced by AI.
Quick final question from Guy, how does the panel see the rising passenger taxes in Europe affecting relevant business models?
I'm not sure where the fun is, the fun fact, but no, obviously it's a problem. We factor that in, we calculate that in. In our particular model with PC-12s, we're very much in favor now because of that in France, because we pay way less of these taxes. But yeah, it's a burden, and it's making the market intransparent and complex and tardy. The customers are paying for it at this stage, so far, at least on the turboprop side. But there is very little understanding. I would say ETS fees in general are supported by passengers because they see that, they're entrepreneurs, they see that in other business. But like the French tax is just, it's accepted because they have to pay, and they pay it, but it's not sense-making.
Okay, and we have a panel on that, or a session on that coming up later. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks.
Thank you.